We humans, the representatives of the genus Homo, have achieved astounding success over the 2.8 million years of our existence. Especially in the last 2 centuries, our progress has been nothing short of explosive. Today we are surrounded by technologies that would seem like magic to our ancestors, and the global average life expectancy has reached 73 years. But this road was not paved with gold. Our history is a chronicle of struggle, pain, and survival against all odds. This is reflected in the shocking numbers of the past. In 15th century France, people lived an average of 30 years. In ancient Greece, 25, and in the Neolithic period, that figure dropped to just 20. However, even these brutal times could be considered a golden age compared to what was happening at the dawn of humanity. If you think the Middle Ages were dark, you haven't looked deep enough into the stone. Paleontologists regularly find the remains of our ancestors who died under circumstances so violent they are difficult to imagine. But there is one specific species whose history in the archives of suffering stands alone. About 2 million years ago in East Africa lived Homo habilis, handyman. Their lives were so short and so bleak that it borders on the surreal. Most members of this species never even saw their teenage years. The average life expectancy of Homo habilis was just 12 years. Imagine this: at an age where a modern child is just beginning to understand the world, a handyman was already considered a frail elder, if they were lucky enough to live that long. That is 6 times less than the modern average. And that figure is likely an overestimate, as infant remains rarely survive for millions of years. For Homo habilis, every day was a losing battle against a planet that was actively trying to destroy them. Today we open the archive of the worst time to ever be called a human. The biological trap. Why was their existence so short? The answer lies in the fact that everything was against them, including their own bodies. Homo habilis were among the smallest humans to ever walk the Earth. Their height rarely reached 120 centimeters, about a third shorter than us. They weighed as much as a modern child, roughly 30 to 40 kilograms. This fragile skeleton was not built for power. It was the product of an uncertain transitional stage of evolution. They were stuck in a biological limbo. They had long arms and primitive hands, still adapted for clutching branches. This should have provided them with safety in the treetops. But unlike the nimble chimpanzees, Homo habilis were already poor climbers. For them, a fall from a branch wasn't an accident. It was a death sentence. Their bones lacked the density to compensate for their small size. But the most terrifying part was that their diet pulled them down, directly into the arms of death. One might assume that a creature living in trees would be a vegetarian, but the isotopes in their teeth tell a different story. Homo habilis were obsessed with meat. They had massive jaws and large incisors designed to literally tear chunks of flesh and crush bone. This meat addiction forced them to leave the safety of the trees and descend to the ground, to the waterholes where the most terrifying predators of the Pleistocene were waiting. They were not hunters, they were low-tier scavengers. Their technology was limited to crude stone flakes, barely enough to drive a jackal away from a gnawed skeleton. Against the true kings of Africa, they were nothing more than a light snack. A gallery of horrors, the masters of the savanna. Africa at that time was not just a wild land, it was a laboratory for creating perfect killers. Researchers have identified more than 30 species of predators that specialized in hunting early hominids. The most terrifying among them was Meganterion, a saber-toothed cat the size of a jaguar, but much more massive. It had powerful front legs with curved claws that could pin a struggling human to the ground in an instant. Once the victim was immobilized, Meganterion used its heavy artillery, 2 long dagger-like fangs. It plunged them into the throat, severing arteries and nerve clusters. Death came quickly, but it wasn't always merciful. In the archives, skulls have been found with bite marks that perfectly match the jaws of these cats. One specimen shows that the predator didn't just bite the neck, it clamped its jaws over the victim's entire face, crushing the skull and suffocating the human simultaneously. Meganterion hunted humans so frequently that it literally changed the chemical composition of this species' bones. It was a highly specialized liquidator of the human race. But the cats were not the only threat. Machairodus, one of the largest felines in history, also patrolled these lands. Some individuals weighed up to 400 kilograms, the size of a large polar bear. They didn't need to chase their prey, they were masters of the ambush. If you were a young Homo habilis, you didn't even need to be caught in their teeth. A single blow from a paw that size was enough to shatter your spine instantly. Then there was Denophelis, the false saber-tooth, which likely stalked humans right in the thickets of the very trees they called home. Nightmare in the water, the anthropophagus. If the land was a trap, the water was a nightmare. A love for fish and the necessity of drinking brought Homo habilis to the edge of rivers and lakes. It was there that Crocodylus anthropophagus, the man-eating crocodile, awaited them. This wasn't just a large crocodile, it was a monster. Reaching 7.5 meters in length and weighing 1.5 tons, it was significantly larger than any modern saltwater crocodile. Its name is no coincidence. We have direct evidence of its diet. The remains of Homo habilis teenagers have been found with heavy, crushed injuries to their feet and shins that perfectly match the teeth of this giant. Anthropophagus attacked from ambush, grabbed the victim by the legs, and dragged them to the depths. There, it used the death roll, tearing off limbs while the person was still conscious. Visually, this creature was even more terrifying. 2 horn-like crests were located above its eyes, giving it a demonic appearance. For a small human without weapons, this was an encounter with the god of death. Scavengers and running shadows. Even if you managed to avoid the cats and crocodiles, the hyenas were watching you. The giant hyena Pachyrhacota was the size of a lioness and possessed a bite force capable of crushing a buffalo's bones like dry twigs. They didn't wait for you to die, they hunted in packs. If a pack of these hyenas caught a human, they didn't care about a clean kill. They would begin eating the prey alive, starting with the soft tissues of the abdomen. But there was an even worse problem: Chasmoporthetes, the running hyena. Unlike its modern relatives, this creature had legs like a cheetah and could reach incredible speeds. Homo habilis, who was not a good runner and tired easily, didn't stand a chance in a sprint. If you were spotted in an open space, your fate was sealed. You would be overtaken and torn apart by teeth as sharp as razors. Internal decay, rot and famine. The struggle was not only with fangs and claws, it was happening inside the body itself. Of the specimens we have studied, only 40% had healthy teeth. The rest suffered from catastrophic enamel wear, chips and cracks. Imagine you are 10 years old and your teeth are as destroyed as if you were 80. This wasn't a result of poor hygiene in our modern sense. It was the result of desperation. Being bottom-tier scavengers, Homo habilis finished what others left behind: bone fragments, dirt-covered roots, and tough plant fibers. Their teeth literally crumbled to dust before they could even grow up. This made the process of absorbing calories painful and inefficient. They slowly died of malnutrition, even if there was meat around that they simply couldn't chew. Family feud, the killer cousins. The Pleistocene was a time of violent climate fluctuations. Africa was becoming colder and drier. Food was becoming scarce, leading to systemic famine. Under these conditions, the struggle for every piece of carrion became a total war. And in this war, Homo habilis had competitors who were much more dangerous than cats. They shared territory with 3 other human species: Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, and Paranthropus boisei. Handyman was the smallest and least intellectually developed in this group. While Homo erectus was already beginning to master fire and create complex hand axes, Handyman was still fumbling with primitive sharp stones. The brain of Erectus was almost twice as large. In a world of vanishing resources, this intellectual gap was a death sentence. We have evidence of violence between these groups. Although Handyman occasionally managed to kill a Paranthropus for food, more often than not, he was the victim. They were the losers in the human family tree, displaced by more advanced cousins and hunted by giant predators. Why didn't they disappear immediately? Looking at this list of horrors, the question arises, how did this species even last for nearly 1 million years? The answer lies in their social structure. Paleontologists suggest that Homo habilis lived in unusually large groups, up to 85 individuals. This was their only true defense. In a world of saber-toothed cats and 7-meter crocodiles, safety was only in numbers. They might have built primitive windbreaks or crude huts, huddling together during cold nights. They shared food, they watched the shadows together, and they died in huge numbers so that the species could endure. A numbers game, that is what allowed them to survive. For every teenager eaten by a predator, there were a dozen more who managed to leave offspring. Conclusion: the final archive. Eventually, the pressure became unbearable. High mortality, superior competitors, and evolving predators finally broke them. They disappeared from the paleontological record about 1.6 million years ago. Being Homo habilis meant living in an endless cycle of fear, hunger, and pain. It was a life lived in the shadow of giants, where the only reward for reaching your 12th birthday was the realization that you were now an elder in a dying world. We look at their bones and see more than just fossils. We see the beginning of our journey, the thorniest path in the history of the planet. We survived where they fell, but we must not forget the price at which our security today was bought.